Hurrying home after a fishing trip with his mistress, the rich man went to the shop to buy fish for his inept wife. Had he known? The July afternoon sun was beating down mercilessly. Marion, a pretty young waitress, was busily moving between the tables, taking orders and serving refreshments. Her deft movements and friendly smile attracted the eyes of the men. But it seemed that she did not notice it. Her thoughts were far away. She anxiously glanced at her watch, wondering if she could make it home before her husband left for his long-awaited fishing trip. Marion's in the clouds again. The receptionist, a stern, middle-aged man, called out to her. "You see, the visitors are waiting." Marion perked up, hurriedly adjusted her apron, and hurried to the new company at the far table, while she replayed her conversation with her husband. Justin, a successful businessman, said he was going on a 2-night sleepover with friends. "Does Justin have to go away for the weekend?" Marion asked with a little resentment. "I thought we'd go out tonight, to the cinema or to a cafe." "Come on, Marion. What cinema?" Justin waved her off carelessly. "It's summer. It's a sin to be in the city. Think about it. When else you and your men will go to the countryside? We'll have a rest, warm up, go fishing. Again, we'll boil soup. But everything as it should be." "Perhaps I could come with you?" Marion suggested hopefully. "I'll keep you company and get some fresh air." Justin hesitated for a moment, but immediately laughed. "Come on, you're not fishing. It's a man's thing. It's not a woman's thing. We don't take anyone there. Yes, have a rest. Me and the guys will go there and back quickly, and don't worry about a thing." "Well, at least I'll call sometimes," Marion sighed. "I'd be worried." "Oh," said Justin, smiling indulgently. "It's not a very good connection. When I get back, I'll tell you everything in the best possible way. You go shopping, go to the markets, get some exercise, have some fun. Anyway, what's there to miss?" He winked and left the room. Marion saw him off with a wistful look. A bad feeling stirred in her chest. Something's not right here. Why does Justin want to go fishing so badly? And he's not even asking her any questions. It's weird, but she didn't dare argue with her husband. She was too used to indulging him in everything. Justin was such a respectable, wealthy man. How could she refuse him? So she gave in, though a worm of doubt gnawed at her insides. It's true. Lately, her husband had been missing a lot of late nights. He had meetings and negotiations, and now he was going away for 2 days. I can't get any affection from him. Either he laughs or he doesn't. At least he brings money to the house, so I can't complain. And he bought Marion a new car and a fur coat, so live and let live. But lately there seems to be less money in the house. But it is understandable. Justin's firm was going through, according to him, difficult times. He should be doing his job. Marion sighed heavily. You never know, maybe she's just getting herself worked up for nothing. But her husband went out with his friends. That's what happens. I guess it's true that the connection there is lousy. Let him have a rest. Everything will recover. He's entitled to it. She would finish her Saturday shift and go home. Time would fly by. And their Justin by Sunday evening will appear cheerful and cheerful. In the meantime, her husband was absorbed in the pleasant preparations. He whistled cheerfully as he went through his gear and put his wading boots, thermos and freshly bought spinning rod in the boot of the new SUV. A carnivorous grin played on his face. He'd fooled his beloved around again. Nothing. Let her suffer a little for prevention. In the meantime, I'm going to have a good time with Beatrice, my new girlfriend. She's a real piece of work. And what's more, no strings attached. After dropping off his things, Justin pulled out his phone. Hello, Amanda. Hi, it's Justin. Yeah, about the lake house. You and I made plans for this weekend, remember? I just want to make sure everything's okay with the reservation. There was a nice woman's voice on the phone. Justin, of course, is agreed. And your wife is here, by the way. The house is all ready. I've tidied up. The linen's freshly made. We have a great view of the lake. You'll see for yourself. So come and have a comfortable holiday. That's nice, they're eagles, Justin said. Well, wait, I'll be right there. And this. Thank you for your understanding. You're welcome, the woman smiled into the receiver. I can see right through people. You and your wife need some alone time. Romance, so to speak, refresh. Come on over. Justin hummed and disconnected. Wow, to be alone with my wife. If only the owner of the lodge knew the truth. However, for an extra fee, anyone will understand everything as it should be. And Marian would do better not to know. Let her stay at home and cook. That's her duty. She's called a wife. Quickly descending the stairs, Justin headed for the car with his fishing rods in his hands. On the doorstep, he came face to face with Marian. She was coming home from work, flushed from her brisk walk. She looked very excited. "Had you decided to go after all?" she asked, looking into her husband's eyes with secret hope. "Maybe I'll go fishing with you? Weekend after all? Well, maybe together?" "Come on," Justin waved her off without rancor. "I promised the men. I can't let them down. Do you want to invite your girlfriends? You can sit and talk." Justin patted his bag. "These 2 or 3 days will pass, there will be dinner. I'll pick up a pike." With a light heart, he walked to the car. Marian saw him off with a wistful look. "Shall we really get some of the girls together? We could sit and chat. Only she doesn't have any close friends. And frankly, she's just a mate. Nothing more. She's given her whole life to family life. What's there to make friends for?" Marian went home and made dinner. She didn't like eating in cafes. Not because of the deductions from her wages. It was just that home-cooked food tasted better somehow. "I think I'll make do," Marian thought. "I'll buy a dress and treat myself. What fun is that? It'll cheer me up." Marian began to get ready before going out. She could not resist dialing her husband's number. "The caller is unavailable," she heard. She threw the phone down in frustration. Marian resolutely slammed the door shut. "That's okay. I'll try to get through the 2 days somehow. I'm not a little girl and I'm my own boss. I can do what I want." Self-hypnosis didn't help much, but there was no choice. One could only hope the alarm was false. After all, Justin loves me. He wouldn't cheat on me out of nothing. And her husband was already driving on the motorway out of town, towards a truly fabulous weekend. Beatrice will be so pleased. I'm sure she's been waiting. She missed me, he thought. He longed for her hot kisses, tender hands, and unbridled passion. Oh, life is good, and it will be even better. At the agreed place, Justin parked at a neat log cabin on the shore of a forest lake. The scenery was marvelous. Not a soul around, just what you need for solitude. He switched off the engine. He stretched until his vertebrae crunched and squeezed his eyes blissfully shut. Anticipation came in hot waves. But that's it, now we can relax to the fullest. He climbed out of the car, stretching sweetly as he went, and Beatrice was already waiting for him on the porch. Tanned, slim, in a light-colored sundress, she smiled dazzlingly, flashing her snow-white teeth. "At last, old Beryl. Have you been waiting for your journey?" she exclaimed. "Well done, my soul." Justin winked playfully, picking the girl up in his arms. "How about a swim, and then go on?" Beatrice laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. There was a sly sparkle in her eyes. "Sounds like fun. Let me feed you lunch first. You must be hungry, aren't you?" "You bet I am." Justin picked up on that, kissing the girl's fragrant neck. "But I don't have an appetite for food, so let's start with dessert." Laughing happily, the couple disappeared into the cabin. Justin felt 10 years younger, almost 24 hours of bliss, and no remorse, no boring wife at his side. It's beautiful. In the city, Marian's heart was scratching. The new dress, of course, pleased the eye, but she could not get rid of the oppressive feeling that something irreparable was happening. But there was nowhere to go. She could only chase away the gloomy thoughts and spend the lonely evenings within the four walls. Without her husband, the house seemed empty. Sighing heavily, Marian ate dinner without appetite and sat down in front of the TV. On the screen, cheerful faces changed to cheerful music, only it didn't make her heart feel any better. The log cabin by the lake was filled with merriment. Justin and Beatrice, looking forward to 2 whole days of freedom and solitude, did not hide their high spirits. The landlady had dropped off some berries. Have a good holiday," thanked Amanda, smiling. "Thank you, Amanda. My wife and I are very pleased. We try to keep things in order," Justin replied, hugging Beatrice. As soon as the hostess came out, Beatrice immediately laughed and playfully poked Justin in the side. "Oh, you say that too with your wife. What about Marion? If she'd known, she'd have bitten her elbows." "Let her bite her elbows." Justin waved her off carelessly. "I told her I was going fishing with the men, so she believed me. All the way to the market." "Do you know how sly you are?" Beatrice pretended to be indignant. "What am I then? An alternate aerodrome?" "You are my queen," Justin murmured, drawing the girl to him. "The one and only. And Marion is just a misunderstanding. You know, for status, we can't get divorced now that everything is so well put together, can we?" The couple laughed merrily. Satisfied with their idea, Justin took Beatrice in his arms and spun her around the room, kissing her face and neck. The girl squealed with delight and pretended to fight back. The lovers decided to go for a swim. The lake was cool and quiet. In the air floated the intoxicating aroma of pine needles. Justin and Beatrice, holding hands, walked leisurely along the shore, anticipating how they would plunge into the clear surface, and then they would lounge in the sun, sipping cold wine. Beauty. But the idyll was suddenly broken by an unexpected boyish voice. "Are you here to fish too?" Justin turned round irritably at the sound. At the water's edge, right in front of their house, there was a boy of about 10 years old. He was sitting on an overturned bucket with an old fishing rod in his hands, staring curiously at the couple. "Hey kid, what are you doing here?" Justin frowned. "Trespassing on private property without permission." "With permission," the boy said cheerfully. "I've been fishing here every summer for years. Amanda lets me. She says you can come anytime you want, and there's plenty of room for everyone." Justin whistled. What they needed was more witnesses. The kid might see something he didn't want to see, and then say something. It'd be a rumor to anyone who didn't want it. "How's the bite?" Justin decided to turn his anger on Justin. "Yes," the boy nodded happily. "Grandmother, then, has given up." Beatrice grinned. "Are your parents not happy about your catch?" The boy looked down and concentrated on his sandals. "I don't have parents," he said quietly. "My grandmother and I live together. She is old now, so I do my best. I do what I can. I fish, I work in the garden. Oh, we'll be all right." Beatrice clucked her tongue sympathetically. "Wow, an orphan so small and already with cares. Not like some people. God forgive me." Justin was also embarrassed, but for a different reason. He didn't like all that snotty charity. "Listen, kid," he began firmly. "Couldn't you go fishing somewhere else? It's a bit awkward. People have come for a holiday, and here you are with your fishing rods. It's a big place. Look for a place where it's freer." The boy clapped his eyes in surprise. "I always fish here. It's the best fishing spot. Big fish are coming. In other places, there are only small fish. Not enough for soup." It's breaking. Justin began to boil. "What are you getting so worked up about? Maybe we're looking for privacy, romance, and you're right here. Get out of here. Get out of here." The boy shrank back in fear and fell silent. Large tears ran down his cheeks. He got up without complaint, picked up his fishing rod and walked away, hanging his head. "Justin, what are you really doing?" Beatrice said reproachfully. The child was not interfering with anything. "Oh, it wasn't in anyone's way." Justin mocked her. "There'll be a dozen of them now. There's no way to fight them off. I don't need a kindergarten in my neighborhood." "Well, think about it." He turned and strode back toward the house. On the way, he put his arm round Beatrice's shoulders. The girl glanced guiltily at the upset boy, but obediently followed his lover. Justin would know best. He wouldn't advise against it. But the boy was sobbing with resentment. He was wandering down the dusty path with his fishing rods, tears in his eyes. All sorts of bitter thoughts came into his head. Why did that uncle pick on him? So what? A rich man spoke out. He probably has no children himself, so he doesn't understand anything. If his mum were alive, he wouldn't have to go around looking for food. Grandma has given up lately. I've got to keep on keeping on. At first, Kevin wanted to wait for the bus at the bus stop nearby, but then he decided. I'd rather walk, and it wasn't far to the house anyway. So the boy sighed and walked along the road, occasionally wiping his wet cheeks with his sleeve. The fishing line was trying to get away, but what did it matter now? The sun had long since risen by the time Kevin reached his yard. It was with a heavy heart that he climbed to the third floor of the old Fluff House and timidly turned the key in the lock. Grandmother Cassandra was waiting for him, as always, in a chair by the window. "Here you are back," she was glad to see him, straightening up and stretching out her wrinkled hands to him. "Well, how was fishing today?" The boy sighed heavily and lowered his eyes. "They chased me off the lake. They say I'm disturbing the rest, you see. And in other places there are only small fish, but it's a shame to even catch them." Grandma clucked her tongue in sympathy. "Oh, my onion, woe. And who was so heartless as to speak out?" "Some rich guy with a girl," Kevin said. "They'd rented Amanda's house." "Well, don't take offense at them," his grandmother consoled him. "God will judge them. They're unscrupulous. It's not your fault. What a good boy you are. You look after me. You're growing up to be a provider." "There will be a holiday on our street," Cassandra sighed, rising from her chair and wandering into the kitchen in her stubby slippers. "Let's go get something to eat. I've made potatoes and pickles. Now we wait until they go back to work on Monday. You get there early, you might catch something." When Gwen's house is empty of holiday makers. Kevin nodded obediently and followed his grandmother, dragging his fishing rods behind him. Maybe tomorrow would be a better day, but for now let's go eat potatoes and cucumbers, or we'll be rumbling in our stomachs all night. If only Mum were alive. What can I say now? In spite of all her efforts, Marion's thoughts kept returning to Justin and his mysterious fishing. It's been almost 24 hours, and I haven't heard a word from him. It's like he's disappeared into thin air. Maybe he's out with his mates, and he's having a blast. She can't find a place for herself here. At some point, when there were few visitors, Marion couldn't stand it and decided to call her husband. It was ringing, but no one was picking up. She stubbornly called again and again, until she heard her husband's cheerful voice. "Hello. Why are you calling so persistently? I told you, there's hardly any connection." "Justin, at least tell me that you are well." Marion begged. "I'm going crazy here. What if something happened?" "Come on," Mary said, her husband carelessly. "We're fine. We had a great fishing trip and a great soup. We're going home already. Don't miss me." "Wait," sighed Marion, trying to suppress bitter resentment. "Of course you will. As it is, I'm waiting for you." "All right, kisses," Justin said cheerfully, and passed out. Marion looked longingly at the silent phone. She had no choice but to wait and hope for the best. Justin smirked and stashed the smartphone in his pocket. At that moment, he was not on the lake shore, but in a fish shop. Justin was choosing the right fish for camouflage. "These bream are nice," he admired, pointing his finger at the counter. "You'd be lucky not to get one of these. It'll do for booty." He bagged a couple of them, nodding to the saleswoman, hiding a smile. She knew very well that the fish were not from the lake, but from the local farm. But the customer is always right if he pays. Why does a man need fish? It's an old-fashioned scheme. Justin paid and, whistling, headed for the exit. He nearly knocked down a boy in the street. "Be careful, kid," the man said. "Are you going to hurt someone else?" The boy raised his head and Justin gasped in surprise. It was the same fisherman from the lake, the little brat who had recently been reprimanded for his curiosity. Kevin, too, recognized the offender and froze with his mouth hanging open. But then his gaze fell on the bag in Justin's hands, and his eyes squinted suspiciously. "Weren't you fishing, Uncle?" he asked, perplexed. "Why do you need a shop?" "That's none of your business," Justin growled, feeling the blood rush to his cheeks. "Didn't your grandmother teach you not to bother grown-ups about nothing?" I was just asking, the boy shrugged. Why are you so angry? Justin gritted his teeth. But he waved silently and left the shop, slamming the door. What a truth teller. I don't want the town gossiping, he muttered. I'll deal with him somehow. Justin got into the car. The first thing he did was to check the fish. There were 3 of them, big, silvery, still bright-eyed. Just right for bait. Well, in the sense of proof of successful fishing. My wife will be curious about the result. And here it is, the trophy. On the way home, Justin imagined what a touching story he would make up for Marion. But how he and the men had fished till dawn, then cooked soup on the fire, how they had almost missed this catfish. It was beautiful. Justin came home in high spirits. Marion was still gone. He breathed a sigh of relief and began to prepare for her arrival. The first thing he did was to proudly place the fish he'd bought on a platter and in the fridge. Then he changed into his home clothes and put some whiskey in a glass for a bit of fun. It was necessary to create an atmosphere at a hearty dinner. He sat down in the kitchen with his foot on his leg and waited for his wife, wondering where to begin his story. Marion was at this very moment darting between tables, taking orders. It had been a very busy evening in the cafe. There were many people in the cafe. Some demanded menus, others complained about the cold coffee. Others were fussy, not knowing what to choose. Marion barely had time to serve them all. Even the receptionist passed by every now and then. Throwing disapproving glances at her, they said, not smiling enough and not fast enough. What a night, Marion sighed with relief when another guest appeared at the door. An old woman in a modest dress and shawl, looking round timidly. In her hand, she was holding an old bag. Good afternoon. Please, sit down. Can I bring you a menu? Marion nodded to her and hurried to meet her. Hello, darling, said the grandmother, smiling weakly. No, I didn't come to eat. I'm told you need people here. I was wondering about a job. A job? Marion was surprised. You do realize that the cafe has never employed such old people, don't you? It's not easy for young people, and you don't belong here. But she nodded stubbornly. I am still a strong woman. I can wash dishes, sweep the floors. I'd like only part-time work. I won't take much. It's hard to do it alone. At least I'll earn money for bread. I have one grandson. I'm with him. My name is Cassandra. She was silent, and Marion suddenly felt a lump in her throat. Why, grandmother? It must have become unbearable if she decided to look for a job in her old age, she thought. Wait a minute. I'll talk to the receptionist, she said. Maybe she'll have some advice. Cassandra nodded hastily, not hiding her relief. Good. It might be a good thing. She had to raise her grandson somehow, to get him back on his feet. The pension is a pittance. How can you survive on it? And in September, he'll go back to school, textbooks, notebooks, and shoes. In the meantime, Marion resolutely went to the receptionist. No, why? Can't you help your grandmother? At least let her do the dishes. It's not much work, but she won't starve in her old age, she reasoned. Winston, she began firmly, approaching her superiors. Here's the matter. A grandmother has come to us, asking for a part-time job. She wants to get a job washing dishes, sweeping floors. Let's take it, eh? It'll help. The administrator wrinkled his nose like a toothache, but he looked questioningly at the granny and shook his head. You, Marion? Where do we need such personnel? And God forbid we'll die in the workplace or slip. You'll have to answer for it later. I don't think so. Let him sit at home, receive his pension, and prepare white slippers. And we don't want them in our employ. Marion opened her mouth to object, but looked at her grandmother, who was hunched over, and changed her mind. Indeed, where can she work at her age? Only to undermine her health, sighing, she waved her hands guiltily. Cassandra bit her lip and nodded. She knew what she was getting into. Who needs her? An old wreck. Just daydreaming for a second. Well, it's not the first time. I'll move on somehow, she sighed. I'm sorry, it's not working, Marion mumbled as she came closer. The bosses are against it. Maybe I should try my luck elsewhere. It's a busy time here, as you can see. Thank you, my daughter, smiled her grandmother sadly. Thank you for your trouble. Well, I won't bother you anymore. I'll go. I might look for lodgers. She was just about to leave, but then she suddenly realized. Oh, honey, I'll tell you what. Come and have tea with us sometime. It's awkward, said Marion, embarrassed. But don't be shy. Sternly interrupted her grandmother. I am inviting you from the bottom of my heart. With these words, she dictated to Marion the name of the street and the number of the house. And on top of that, she wrote it down on a piece of paper just in case. Then she rose from her chair and strode out, dragging her bag. Marion stared after her confusedly, biting her lip. But what kind of life is this? She slammed her towel on the counter in frustration and returned to her duties. There was nothing to write out of order. But what was Grandma to do now? What will she live on? Would she really be begging? Marion resolutely pulled her apron and ran after her grandmother, caught up with her at the very exit, and took her by the hand. Wait, grandmother. Let's come back tomorrow, she said. It's just today there's a jam. You see, the bosses are on edge, and Megan will be the hostess tomorrow. She's kind, so I hope she'll be understanding. I'll explain everything to her and ask her for a job for you, to get you somewhere. Cassandra shook her head incredulously. Oh no, my dear. You'll only embarrass yourself in front of the big bosses. Oh, come off it. Marion waved her off. I've got the hands, the legs, and the head. Are you not a worker? Will you be here at 1 or 2 o'clock tomorrow? And I'll meet you. Grandmother was moved and hugged Marion in an outburst. Thank you, my daughter. I will never forget your kindness. God bless you. Well, I'll give you health, said Marion, embarrassed. Run along. Let's talk tomorrow. The grandmother nodded and hurried away, and Marion suddenly felt a lump come to her throat. That's how it is when you live, and there's no one to help you. It is well if kind people meet and lend a hand, and if not. No sooner had she finished this thought than the door of the cafe opened again. On the threshold stood the old boy with fishing rods. Hello, he smiled shyly, shuffling from foot to foot. Didn't you have my grandmother here, the old one in the kerchief? She was Marion nodded. She just left. Marion nodded. Kevin, you must have seen your grandmother? Yes, I have, Kevin answered. How do you know? Your grandmother was looking for a job with us, Marion sighed. But it didn't work out. The bosses didn't like it. Kevin lowered his head. I see, she's getting desperate. She said she'd go anywhere. As long as I can earn a living. It's hard on her and me, you know. Marion pressed her lips together sympathetically. It's not easy, but you're doing so well. You go to school and help your grandmother. At the mention of his parents, Kevin shrank back and looked away. They're gone. They're dead. I hardly remember them anymore. It's just me and Gran. She looks after me. Marion's heart ached. It's a shame to be an orphan at that age. It's a good thing grandmother didn't give up on her grandson and found the strength to raise him. And now he's looking for a part-time job in her old age. It's a hard life for them. She gave Kevin a reassuring pat on the head. It'll all work out somehow. I told my grandmother to come tomorrow. The boy nodded gratefully. Thank you. You have no idea. We need all the help we can get right now. I'll help my grandmother to come to you tomorrow. He smiled shyly and turned to leave. But then Marion's phone rang loudly in her pocket. She apologized and picked up the receiver. The screen showed a picture of Justin, tanned, smiling, holding a huge carp. Kevin slid his gaze across the display and suddenly froze, his eyes rounding. Oh, I know him. He used to fish at our lake. He chased me away from a good spot. And then he bought a whole bag of fish in the shop. Marion blinked, perplexed. What are you talking about? What lake? My husband and his friends were going fishing and they catch their own fish there. Why would you get it from a shop? Kevin spread his hands. I don't know, but I've definitely seen it both on our lake and in the shop. Then I wondered why he left fishing at night and went to the shop. Marian felt the color rise to her cheeks. What the hell is that kid Kevin talking about? Justin is suddenly in the shop buying fish. There's no such thing. He never bought fish. He always caught them himself. Kevin must be confused. Or made it up. She resolutely pushed the silly thoughts away and dropped the call. She'd have to listen to Kevin later. He's so worried, poor guy. You must be mistaken, dear Marian said softly. My husband doesn't shop in shops. He's a fisherman. Look at the trophies he brings home. She turned the phone screen towards the boy and pointed at the picture, but Kevin shook his head stubbornly. No, I'm not wrong, I'm telling you for sure. It's him. I saw him at the lake and in the shop. He was a big, bald guy with a husky voice. He scolded me and chased me off the shore, and he was there late at night. Marian's insides were torn. It's a perfect match, the height, the build, the baldness. It's definitely him. He's got a temper. Always dissatisfied. So he wasn't out fishing all this time. The telephone rang again with a demanding trill. Marian glanced at the screen. Her husband must be calling again, poor thing. Gritting her teeth, she dropped the call and turned to the boy. He was staring at her with his eyes wide, guilty and confused, as if he wasn't happy about the truth that had slipped out of his mouth. Thank you, said Marian, forcibly. You seem to have opened my eyes. I shouldn't have trusted that deceiver for so many years. But nothing, today will come to him fishing. Oh, really? The boy was frightened. I didn't mean to upset you. Maybe I really mixed up, but there are such people bald, angry. How many of them are there? No, good for you, Marian smiled sadly. You can't run away from the truth. It's high time you opened your eyes. Yes, I believed everything. But it's all right. I'll manage somehow. You run along. I won't keep you any longer. I'll tell you what. Come back together tomorrow and we'll look for a job for you. Kevin nodded sullenly and walked towards the door. It was hard on his soul. I thought I was telling the truth, but it didn't make me feel any better. I'd upset such a good woman, destroyed her faith in her husband. Maybe he shouldn't have opened his mouth in the first place. If he'd kept silent, she wouldn't have worried. Who knew? And Marian stood in the middle of the hall, staring thoughtlessly at one point. Angry, bitter, despairing thoughts swarmed in her mind. How could it be? But how dare he deceive her for so long, to make a mockery of her in front of everyone? What does he take her for? A fool, no other way. The telephone was ringing incessantly. The husband must have sensed something wrong. It's understandable he's back already, and his wife isn't home. Suspected something? Nothing. Let him be nervous enough, he'll dance on her nerves. That's enough. Marian resolutely picked up her bag and headed for the exit. That's enough. Now she will deal with this cheat. Once and for all, we'll say everything that is on her heart. And then we'll see. After all, she's not the one who's going to clean up this mess. With these thoughts, she left the cafe without looking back. A difficult conversation and complete uncertainty awaited her. But one thing Marian knew for sure, she was not going to live in the old way with lies and innuendo. At first, she wanted to calm down, to enter the flat with a nonchalant look, to question Justin, to listen to how he would get out of it. And then she wanted to make a scene, nail him to the wall with hard facts. Maybe I'd be able to nail him to the wall. But as soon as Justin appeared on the doorstep with a cheerful face, Marian burst into tears. All her resentment, all her suspicions, came flooding out at once. You cheat, you scoundrel. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think you'd keep telling me lies? I know where you've been and who you've been with. Justin froze in place, his mouth open as silently as a beached fish. He was still clutching the gift bouquet. Apparently, he'd saved it for his wife. But now the flowers looked more pathetic than touching. Marian, what are you doing? He squeezed out, flapping his eyes in incomprehension. What fly bit you? I've been fishing, you know. I brought back a catch. He nodded at the impressive carp on a platter in the middle of the table. I'd taken them out of the fridge beforehand. A catch? What do you mean? Marian snorted scornfully. I know all about your fishing now. And what lake were you on? Which mermaid did you have fun with? What a fisherman you are. All you can do is stick your fishing rod in other people's holes. Justin's eyebrows went up in surprise. Marion, what are you talking about? What mermaids? What whirlpool? I'm there with men, with men. Marion laughed wickedly. Don't be ridiculous. They saw you at the lake, not with men, but with a girl. He was having fun with her and making a fool of me. Then he went to the shop and bought some fish to divert my eyes. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Justin staggered backwards. His mind was filled with scraps of thoughts, one more ridiculous than the next. Who could have seen him? Could it have been Amanda or a random passerby from the lake? I mean, he'd thought of everything so carefully he couldn't have blundered anywhere. And there didn't seem to be anyone in the shop. Wait, what about the kid? But the kid couldn't have ratted him out, could he? Or could he? As she watched her husband's tossing and turning, Marion only grew more agitated. Didn't you expect me to find out? Figuring out how to get away with it? It's too late, darling, you can't get away with it now. I know everything. I've had enough of your lies. I don't want to be a laughing stock anymore. She snatched her sweatshirt off the rack and headed for the door. Justin finally came to his senses and rushed out. Marion, stop. Wait, you. Well, I'm sorry, I was out with my mates. We had a little fun with these women, but it's not serious. You're my wife, and you're the only one I love. Marion stopped, sweeping him away with an annihilating glare. Do you love me? If I loved you, I wouldn't want to go out with you. All right, no more games. I can't go on like this. I don't want to, and I won't. Goodbye. She resolutely opened the door and went out into the stairwell. Her husband jumped out, trying to hold her by the elbow. Marion, where are you going? Out for the night? Come back and we'll talk. Well, if you want me to kneel down. Marion pulled away from him like fire. No, thank you. It's a deal. And you're used to kneeling in front of that mermaid, aren't you? I don't want to see or hear from you again. Go to her. She shook off her husband's hand from her elbow. Marion ran down the stairs. Justin froze on the landing, confused and angry at the same time. Well, I should have been so stupid to get caught. The police traitor, what a mean thing to do to him. That little kid. Wait a minute, puppy. Meanwhile, Marion was flying through the dark streets, unable to see where she was going. Tears filled her eyes. Resentment was tearing her breast to pieces. Where to now? Not to spend the night on the streets. Really. I'd be ashamed to go to my friends. They'd laugh at me. And there's no chance of gossip. Suddenly she remembered what Cassandra had said about lodgers. Granny said she'd like to rent out a room. What if she'd be willing to take her in for a couple of days? She's got nowhere else to go. And Marion won't be in debt. She'll pay it back. After a little wandering around the courtyard, she found the right doorway and timidly rang the bell. The door opened, and Kevin stood in front of her in his pajamas, yawning. Oh, Aunt Marion, what are you doing here? What are you doing up so late? Is something wrong? Marion frowned embarrassedly. I'm in trouble. I had a fight with my husband and left home, and there's nowhere to go. I want to spend the night at the railway station. Maybe your grandmother will let you stay for a couple of nights. I'll pay whatever you want. What's wrong with you? The boy splashed his hands. Of course, stay with us, grandmother. She will gladly accept. Good people are always welcome. Come in. The tea will warm you up, Kevin fussed, running round the flat. Grandmother looked out of the room at the noise. When she saw Marion, she splashed her hands. Jesus, Marion, what on earth have you done in the middle of the night? Marion, sobbing, told her of her trouble. Grandmother shook her head, sighed, and pressed her hands to her breast. Oh, you rascal. What kind of men are these days? No shame, no conscience. Don't be sad, my dear. Stay with us as long as you need. There's not much room. But you can stay on a cot for the first time, and then we'll see. Thank you, Cassandra. Marion smiled through her tears. But I'm not just going to pay for it, I'm going to pay for it. I have money. Enough for the first time. Oh, no, the landlady waved her hands. No money. We are human beings. We are not strangers. Grandmother Cassandra, but I do not want to sit on the neck of an old woman, began to argue Marion, proving her point. And grandmother suddenly realized. Listen, dear, you promised to speak to the landlady about me. Maybe they'll take me on part-time? Do you think they'll take an old woman? Marion was embarrassed for a moment, but then she found herself. Oh, Grandma Cassandra, I don't know. It's such a busy time now. And you see, our bosses, God forbid, will eat you up and not choke on you. They won't let you work properly. They'll even fight with the saints. Maybe you shouldn't come to us after all. Grandmother frowned, thought about it, and nodded. That's right. That's right. How can I compete with the young? I am an old woman. Who will take care of him if I go to work for a pittance? He's already an orphan. I don't want to be a burden to him. Let him study. Let him go out in peace. Marion threw her arms round her grandmother. We'll get through this. Somehow we will be each other's support, she consoled her, and now and then they cried together. True, people say do not have $100, but have 100 friends. Marion, moved, cried even more, now with gratitude. That's what people are. They are in need, but they are ready to give their last shirt. In the meantime, Kevin was fetching blankets and pillows from the hall. He lay down next to me on an old mattress. Marion, don't be shy. Tell me if you need anything, he said to her. She stroked his head, hardly able to hold back the tears that were coming. What a misfortune. For so many years she thought that she had no one but her husband in the world. But how many kind people around, ready to help, to support in a difficult moment. A little while later, Marion fell into a troubled sleep. She dreamed something cloudy, heavy, as if someone dragged her into a dark pool, pulling her to the bottom, and there was no way to get out. And from somewhere a familiar voice was heard. Marion, what are you doing? What about me? But Marion only waved away, swam further and further away. That's enough. I'll listen to all kinds of scoundrels. Now my life is in my hands, and I will never let anyone to throw me off the right path again. She continued to work in the cafe, trying not to think about the recent upheavals. Her husband, on the other hand, was tearing up. He obviously didn't expect his wife to pull such a stunt and run away from home. Divorce was definitely not in his plans. The reason was simple. Justin had important negotiations looming, where he had to appear with his wife. And the salt of the situation was that the partners had known Marion by sight for a long time. Justin couldn't take his mistress with him. It would immediately raise more unnecessary questions and ruin the whole deal. Finally, Justin took the desperate step of going to Marion's office and begging for help. Marion, help me out, he smiled ingratiatingly, trying to catch her eye. Well, come with me once to the negotiations and I will not touch you again, I swear. And we'll get a divorce without any problems. Well, if that's the way you want it, said Justin. At first, Marion refused. I've had enough of this circus. I've been humiliated, and I'm not going to go along with a cheating liar again. I don't want to. She cut her off. You've made a mess of it. You'll have to clean it up yourself. I'm not playing any more of these games. But Justin wasn't going to give up so easily. He called aside the manager of the cafe and was whispering hotly with him, nodding now and then towards Marion. She heard bits and pieces of phrases. I'll give her a royal thank you, give her a good life so she won't be allowed to make a fool of herself. The receptionist turned out to be a good bloke. He realized that the matter smelt of good money. He nodded enthusiastically. Well, Marion's in trouble now. She's going to have some serious problems in the service. And sure enough, the very next day, the receptionist called her in and surprised her. What's the matter, sweetheart? At your mercy, the client left the restaurant without finishing and without paying. He said that the dish was bad. The waitress on the way apparently spit and have to pay a fine for spoiled food and moral damage. Marion even lost speech from such a statement. What's wrong with you? What client? What damages? I didn't spit. I did everything as usual. But how can you prove it? The administrator has all the trump cards in his hands, threatened to deduct from his salary if he persists. He gave Marion a hefty fine. Just hang in there, he told her. And it's clear why she's trying, whose orders she's following. But if you try to resent it, you'll be out of a job. There was no end to the abuse. Over the next few days, she gave the wrong napkins. She didn't smile enough, and the receptionist did what he wanted, feeling Justin's support behind her. And the goal was the same, to force Marion to give in and agree to go to the unfortunate negotiations. And to top it all off, Marion felt sick, dizzy, and sick to her stomach. She couldn't understand what was wrong with her. Suddenly, she remembered how in the morning, engrossed in work, she grabbed a salad on the run. Although usually Marion tried to avoid eating in cafes, the food might not be the freshest, and they didn't care much about the cleanliness of the kitchen, but not to the whimsy when you rush headlong just to serve the customers with a smile. Is it poison? Marion thought anxiously, listening to the unpleasant sensations. Well, what a misfortune. I've had enough trouble as it is. And then there's my health. Trying to overcome the malaise, Marion continued to move between the tables, but she felt that she would not last long. She was just as likely to drop dead in the middle of the room. It is necessary to do something, somehow, to get out of this ridiculous situation. In the end, driven to exhaustion and despair, Marion gave up. After all, why do I persist? I'll go to this stupid negotiation, she said. Well, I'll smile once for a tick, but then I'll get the long-awaited freedom from debt and from the hated marriage. It's worth it. God be with you. She exhaled tiredly, bumping into Justin at the door. I'll go once, but it's the first and last time. You can't drag me into your scams again. Her ex-husband grinned triumphantly and nodded readily. Of course, everything will be fine. I promise. You'll put on your best dresses, you'll shine, you'll charm, and then look, and we'll sign a contract, and we'll get a divorce. Good for everybody. Marion only sighed doomedly, but did not object. After all, there was nothing to lose. It won't be any worse. In the evening, she and Justin went to a business dinner at a posh restaurant in the city center. Marion was even interested involuntarily. She had never been to such places before. I wonder what the rich people do there. They must have manners and curtsy, not unlike their eatery, she thought. But as soon as they were inside, Marion felt her head spinning again. Nausea was coming up her throat, and her eyes were dark. She should have been at home for a day, not going to this stupid party. Marion, what's wrong? Justin asked anxiously. Noticing her pale face, Justin frowned. What's wrong with you? Are you sick? He asked worriedly. No, I'm fine, Marion said weakly. It will pass. Come on, meet your bumps. Justin glanced at her incredulously, but didn't argue. He didn't want to embarrass him in front of his business partners. He escorted his wife to the richly set table and introduced her to the crowd. Marion did her best to put a social smile on her face, trying not to show how unwell she felt. But she had to hold on a little longer, and then it would be all right. Suddenly, it hit her. Justin hadn't said a word about what the negotiations were about. She had been naive, thinking that her husband was in business, making important deals. But what if there's something wrong? What if he drags her into some scam, and then he himself in the bushes? These thoughts made Marion break out in a cold sweat. Or was it from indisposition? Try to figure it out now. Meanwhile, the evening was gathering momentum. The guests were talking animatedly, champagne glasses were clinking, and bursts of laughter were heard now and then. Marion felt quite broken. Her head was splitting. Nausea was coming up to her throat. I think I must run to the ladies' room, she thought. Marion rose cautiously from the table. I'll be gone for a while, she whispered to Justin. His eyes flashed with annoyance, but he did not object. He didn't want to draw attention to himself. Marion made her way to the bathroom and leaned against the wall. What on earth is the matter? There's no peace here either. I'm dizzy and my ears are ringing. I must really have poisoned myself. But what kind of fool would think of taking expired food, she thought with annoyance. However, it was not a matter of arguments now. The main thing was to survive this unfortunate evening. And then we'll see. It would be better not to embarrass herself in front of the guests. Making an effort, Marion washed her face with cold water and headed back. No, I won't give Justin that pleasure. I'll smile through my tears, but I'll smile until the end, she decided firmly, kicking up her heels. And who invented them? I should have worn trainers and spit on etiquette, Marion thought as she entered the hall. Suddenly the floor shook and rushed towards her. Her eyes went black and her knees buckled. The last thing she saw was the twisted face of her husband, and then the world turned upside down and went out. That was it, the end of the party. And the negotiation was over too, and maybe all the life she'd had before. The thought flashed through Marion's foggy mind a moment before she was swallowed up by the blissful, saving darkness. There in the darkness, there was no pain, no bitterness, no disappointment. There, no one lied to her, betrayed her, or forced her to dance to someone else's tune. There she was free at last, and even in her half-dream, that tantalizing darkness glimmered. Marion clutched the scrap of paper with her grandmother's address and Kevin's address tightly in her hand, a thread that she could still hold on to. A thin ray of hope that kept her from finally giving up. As Marion fainted, panic rose in the room. Guests jumped up from the table, talking loudly, speculating. Someone was already reaching for the phone, going to call an ambulance. Justin was thrashing around his wife, slapping her cheeks or grabbing her head. So much for the deal. It's all down the drain because of that idiot. And it had to come to such an unfortunate end, he thought in despair. Meanwhile, one of his companions, a red-haired man of about 45, took matters into his own hands. He unceremoniously pushed Justin aside and leaned over Marion. Checked for a pulse. Okay, she's got a pulse, but it's weak. We need an ambulance, he said aloud. With these words, he gestured to the waiter and gave clear instructions. Call, boy, tell them the woman is ill. She's fainted. Let them come here like a fire. The waiter nodded and rushed to the phone. The businessman turned to Justin, giving him a hard look. What kind of show is this, if I may ask? Why did you bring us here? He shouted. But Justin just shook his head helplessly. I don't know what's got into her. She was fine this morning, Justin mumbled, puzzled. Maybe she was overexcited. It's a delicate matter, really. Why did you bring a woman to the negotiations in the first place? This isn't what we agreed to. This isn't a picnic with jokes. This is a serious deal. Justin shrank under the annihilating stare, not knowing what to say. Obviously, he had hoped to make an impression, to present himself favorably. He had hoped to impress, to present himself favorably. But now she fainted in front of the whole company. While the two men were arguing, the medics flew into the hall. After a quick look at Marion, she was loaded onto a gurney and rolled away to an unknown destination. Justin stood there, staring helplessly at them. So what now? Everything's gone to hell, the contract's blown, the wife's in the hospital, and the partners are looking wolfish. A disgrace to the whole town. Christopher waved it away squeamishly, as if it were a pesky fly. Red with indignation, he turned to Justin. Okay, honorable man, you've set me up big time. I'm not used to being made a laughingstock, so you can kiss your contract goodbye. We won't stand for this. Justin felt the ground slipping from under his feet. Not this. He exhaled in despair. He had pinned so much hope on this deal, made so many plans, and now how to get out of it, to whom to fall at his feet to forgive him. But the companion was inexorable. Angrily flashing his eyes, he abruptly turned round and left the restaurant accompanied by the other businessmen. Their impenetrable faces showed that it was useless to ask for forgiveness. There was no going back. Justin had screwed up too badly. Left all alone, he collapsed into a chair and covered his face with his hands. What the hell is this obsession? I had to get in such a mess because of Marion. I knew how important this meeting was to me, but it's all right, I'll get back at her. It's because of her I'm in shit now and missed the deal, and lost credibility. Meanwhile, Marion had regained consciousness in the hospital room. Her head was pounding, her mouth tasted foul. Her whole body ached as if after a long illness. She struggled to get up on her elbows and looked around. Where was she? The last thing that came to mind was that she was in a restaurant. Some people, negotiations, and then failure. At that moment, a doctor entered the room, an elderly, tired-looking man in glasses and a white coat. He cursorily looked through some papers on a tablet, then looked at Marion carefully over his glasses. Well, are you awake? Welcome back, so to speak. Fainting in the middle of a banquet is serious, he said. Marion fainted embarrassedly. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. I must have been nervous. It's never happened to me before. I embarrassed my husband and frightened people. Don't worry so much, the doctor smiled encouragingly. Anything can happen. You are now the main thing to think about yourself. And about the baby, of course. About whom? Marion was stunned. The doctor slyly squinted and held a spectacular pause. About your future child. Didn't you know? You're pregnant. You're 6 weeks pregnant, and you're already toxic, so you're down. But don't be upset. It's normal. The important thing now is to take care of each other. Marion froze, looking at the doctor with widened eyes. Pregnancy? That's the last thing we need. And obviously from Justin, but no one else. What am I supposed to do now? He won't even want to hear about a baby. He'd never want to hear about a baby. He'd only care about his own business and change mistresses like a glove. What's he want with children now? They are not noblemen. Her husband will not support her. Noticing the patient's confusion, the doctor patted her hand reassuringly. Don't worry too soon. Rest, gain strength. Thinking about bad things is bad for you and the baby. We'll discharge you in a couple of days, and then we'll discuss a plan of action. Maybe we'll get your husband involved. After all, the father of the child should take care of you. Marion nodded weakly, unable to utter a word. If the doctor only knew that Justin needed this care as much as a fish needed an umbrella. Yes, he'd rather die than admit he's a father. He's probably run off to his mistress by now, the parasite. As if in confirmation of her thought, the door of the ward opened. On the threshold stood her furious husband, red as a cancer, with eyes glittering with rage. Marion involuntarily shrank back, expecting a storm. You have spoiled everything, you wretch, he shouted from the doorway. What have you done? You made me lose my trousers. Do you realize what your hysterics cost me? You blew my best contract. Justin. I'm sorry, I really didn't mean it, Marion whimpered. Do you think I did it on purpose to set you up? But wait till I get hold of you. Then the shocked doctor intervened in the conversation. How do you talk to your wife? She shouldn't be nervous. She's pregnant. You should be happy you're going to be a father soon. Justin choked with indignation. What father? What are you talking about? I can't have any children with that thing. He shifted his glare to his wife, who was huddled in the pillows. We get rid of it quickly. You got it? You go for an abortion whether you want it or not. I'm getting a divorce. I'm going to live with Beatrice. What do you want? How can you do that? Through tears, Marion squeezed out. It's our child. I do not recognize him, his husband sneered ominously. Either you do as I say, or you're on your own without money, without a place to live, without anything. And don't come home. Don't ask, I'll throw you out on the street, and I won't look that you're pregnant. That's it, I said. With these words, he headed resolutely for the door. Marion looked after him in despair, unable to utter a word. Is this really the end? Is she to be left all alone, without means of subsistence, without a roof over her head? And where will she raise her child now? And how? The doctor shook his head sympathetically and put a fatherly arm round her shoulders. Don't cry. We'll think of something. After all, you're not the first, not the last. But Marion was no longer listening. The tears flowed silently down her cheeks, and her lips trembled. Oh, had she known before what her marriage would be like. What to do with all this now? She had to spend almost 2 weeks in the hospital. Her condition was unstable. She was in and out of labor, then back to contractions and seizures. Marion was transferred to the Department of Pathology of Pregnancy, leaving there under strict supervision. Days stretched painfully long. There was no one to visit her. Her husband disappeared. There were no relatives left in the city. But then one day, an unexpected visitor appeared in the ward. Kevin. Shyly slipping through the door, the boy smiled shyly. Hello, Aunt Marion. And I'm here, Auntie, to check on you. How are you feeling? She raised her eyebrows in surprise. Kevin, how did you find me? And anyway, you should be at school now, not running around hospitals. Kevin frowned in embarrassment. My grandma and I were worried, we thought. What if something happened? So we started calling hospitals. He handed Marion a bag of goodies. It's biscuits, homemade sweets. Grandma gave it to me. She said to eat it for your health. Marion smiled through her tears. And then another visitor entered the room, the same companion of Justin, Christopher. Marion fell silent in embarrassment, not knowing how to react. Did he also come to tell her off for a broken deal? But the businessman smiled, looking at her with warmth. Marion, good afternoon. Are you recovering a little? I'm sorry for the short notice. I didn't want to worry you too much. Hello, Christopher. Marion whispered confusedly. And you? Why are you here? About the contract. But I. Oh, come on, said the businessman. What contract now? That's it, the train's gone. That's why you'd better think about your health. Especially in your position, he winked conspiratorially. I didn't just drop by. I wanted to thank you personally. If you hadn't fainted, I'd be up to my eyeballs in debt. Justin was trying to set me up. He'd have got out of it on his own, eaten me up. And then bam. And it all went wrong. You saved me from bankruptcy, said Christopher. Marion flapped her eyes incredulously. I didn't do it on purpose. It just happened. A child. Well, thank God it did, said Christopher encouragingly. Well, that's just the way it is, of course, don't beat yourself up. You did the right thing. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Anyway, Justin's a bastard, it's gonna be bad. Well, I'm gonna give him a hell of a time in court for fraud and deceit. He's nothing to you now. You're free. Marion's eyes welled up with tears of relief. Oh my. She thought all businessmen were the same, one bastard or the other. But no, there are some decent ones. At least someone understood her. Thank you, mate, she said in a trembling voice. You have no idea how much it means to me. I feel like the last piece of shit. Your husband's life ruined, your business almost ruined. Nonsense. Cut the businessman off. You are not guilty of anything, but take care of the baby. He has nothing to do with it. And everything will be fine. If necessary, I'll help with the work. He shook Marion's hand reassuringly and stood up, nodding to Kevin. Can't you walk me to the exit, lad? I see you're a good boy for asking. He obediently followed Christopher, telling him as he went along how he had searched for Marion and how he had found her in the hospital. Left alone, Marion reclined helplessly on the pillow. 100 thoughts swarmed in her head. What a turnaround. So it's not all bad, is it? There are good people in the world, someone to lean on. Maybe he'll pull through. Start a new life without lies and humiliation. Just as long as the baby's okay. She'll never leave him. The only human being she has. Even if he was not conceived from great love, but still the dearest and most desirable. She'd do anything for him. And not to sleep at night, not to starve, only if the baby was born healthy. That's how the circumstances were. These thoughts made Marion's heart warm. After all, what has she got to lose? It won't be any worse than it was. Which means that the road ahead is only forward. Marion stroked her stomach, mentally addressing the future child. Hold on, baby. There are 2 of us now, we can handle everything. Just don't let me down. A week later, Marion was discharged with a lot of recommendations and instructions. But she couldn't go to work right away. Doctors categorically forbade in her position to spend the whole day on legs, and even with toxicosis. Any shaking and running was contraindicated. After walking her to the hospital door, the doctor looked at Marion sternly over his glasses. Look at me and forget about your cafe waitressing. You are not yet to be a waitress. Do not risk your health. Find a quieter job on the computer or on the phone. Or better still, go on maternity leave. By God, you don't want to put the baby in danger. Marion nodded sullenly. The doctor continued. Don't you dare object. Toxicosis is no fun. Carrying a child is also a serious job, and it must be done responsibly. Marion returned to Kevin and his grandmother's flat. But what are we going to do? Money's tight. You can't live with people you know forever. It's shameful to embarrass them. I'll find a quiet job just sitting around doing paperwork while the kids. I've got an idea. It struck Marion one evening at tea. Do you remember Christopher said he'd help? Maybe he'd have a vacancy, a secretary or a dispatcher. I'm not bad at typing and I can answer the phone. What if he does? Grandma nodded approvingly. The day after she was discharged, Marion, full of determination, dialed Christopher's number. He answered almost immediately, as if he had been waiting for her call. Marion, he said cheerfully into the receiver. How are you feeling? Marion smiled embarrassedly, blushing with pleasure. What a thoughtful man. And he remembers her situation. Thank you, Christopher, she said. So we're getting better, Marion sighed. But I'm having trouble with work. The doctor says I can't go back to the cafe, and we have to live on something. Well, I promised to help, answered Christopher. I have a vacancy. Here's the thing. My mom is very old and she needs a carer. It's not so much to keep her healthy as to talk to her. She's exhausted from loneliness, poor thing. Would you like to give it a try? The pay is decent, the hours are convenient, and you can work from home, just what the doctor ordered. Marion's heart jumped with joy. Here's a chance, and how fortunate everything works out, and there's money to be made, and I won't have to run anywhere, and it's a good thing to help an old man. Oh, Christopher, I'd love to. Marion blurted out. I don't know how to thank you. You saved me. Consider it accepted, said the businessman. Let me pick you up. I'll take you to my mum. You'll get acquainted, talk to each other, and then we'll discuss all the nuances. Yes, of course, Marion, not believing her happiness, exclaimed. I'll be there in a moment. Just tell me when. An hour later, happy and enthusiastic Marion sat next to Christopher in his luxury car. Wow, how things are working out. Now it seems that I will not be lost and the future baby on his feet. And I will not starve myself, she thought. Meanwhile, the car was approaching a rich mansion on the outskirts of the city. Marion even took her breath away from the luxury. Christopher personally escorted her to the door and helped her take off her coat. Mum, welcome the guest, he shouted into the back of the house. She's our assistant, but she's also my savior. Footsteps came from the living room. A gaunt grandmother, wrapped in a shawl, appeared on the threshold. Marion took a welcoming step towards her, but suddenly froze in place. Her ears rattled and her eyes went black. It can't be. It just can't be. She screamed. Kevin's grandmother was standing in front of her. Cassandra, Cassie's grandmother. Christopher looked from the frozen mother to the dumbfounded Marion. That was how relatives were reunited. But you know Marion. Who is this Cassie woman? Will someone explain it to me? Granny clutched at her shawl with trembling hands, keeping her eyes fixed on Marion, who was frozen in amazement. Cassie, my little sister. Is she alive? She exclaimed. Marion looked from mother to son in a stupor. It didn't make sense. Christopher was the nephew of Kevin's grandmother, the same one whose twin sister Marion had just met. There was no other explanation for the resemblance. They're twin sisters. Well, wait, let me come to my senses, pleaded the businessman. Sit down, Mum, in the chair. Who's Cassie? Who are you talking about? Cassie is my own sister, slammed Grandma, wiping away her tears. She and I grew up in an orphanage, and then we were separated, taken to different families. I didn't think I'd ever see her again. Christopher only shook his head in confusion. I'm confused. Are you Cynthia, not Cassie? That's crazy. Yes, Cynthia. I'm Cynthia, said the grandmother in a hurry. Marion, shocked, looked from one to the other. Do you mean to say that Cassie's grandmother is your sister? Christopher is her nephew, and Kevin is his nephew, but a cousin. Kevin who? The businessman asked in confusion. It's the first time I've heard, so Cassie has a grandson? Grandma Cynthia guessed. Christopher slapped his forehead and jumped up to his mother. See? Of course I do. That's the boy who was at his grandmother's hospital. Are you Marion, the woman who lives with him? Marion nodded. Yes, Mummy's not alone now, Christopher exclaimed. And your sister has turned up, and her grandson is a nice boy. And I'm his uncle. Wow. That's a turnaround. He kissed the dazed mother with feeling, and then hugged Marion. Oh, Marion, we're a family now. It is not in vain that fate has sent you to me. Now we're sure to solve all our problems, and Mummy will have more fun. And we won't let your Kevin get hurt. That's how it turned out. Marion was ready to burst with emotion. But how things had turned out. Not so long ago she was longing to be locked away from her wicked husband, hiding, wondering how to raise a child. And now she had a family, a job and a roof over her head. What followed merged into one happy whirlpool, ringing hugs, tears of joy. Christopher immediately ordered his assistants to move Grandma Cassie to his mansion, to give her rooms, to do nothing to deny her anything. By evening, everyone was gathered and happy, the crying sisters, a bewildered Kevin smiling, and an emotional Christopher. It was all they could hear on all sides. Cynthia. Cassie. Aunt Marion, are you going to live here now too? For a moment, Marion had a funny thought. How would Justin react to all this? He would probably choke with anger, seeing his wife in such a nice place and surrounded by loving people. That would have been a real show. But she chased the unwelcome memory away. Bastard. He's nothing to her now. Let him go to hell with his mistresses. And this life promised to be a truly happy one. In a big house, everyone would have enough space and care, and grandmothers and sisters and Marion with the future baby. But most importantly, near will be real family people, those who will not betray and support in word and deed. And even if they do not know each other very well yet, it will come. The main thing is that now they have each other. Marion felt dizzy from the excess of feelings. She staggered, leaned on the outstretched hand, and looked up at her savior, Christopher. He was looking at her with genuine tenderness and adoration, as if she were the eighth wonder of the world. Marion was embarrassed and blushing, but in the next moment she felt herself pressed gently against his strong, safe shoulder, and a determined whisper in her ear. Marion, Marion, this is what I want to say. You're not just a savior to me anymore. You're the person I can't imagine my life without. And if you'll let me, if you think I'm worthy, well, I'd like to be a real support to you, a husband and a father to the child. Don't think, Christopher went on, it's not out of pity. I did, with all my heart, even then, in the restaurant. Marion listened to these confused confessions, feeling tears flowing down her cheeks, tears of relief and hope, tears of a woman who had rediscovered her faith and love. Is it really true? Is it not a dream? I guess that old life really is behind me. And Justin was destined for the fate of all liars and traitors. When he lost his wife, he lost his last chance for redemption and traded it for cheap pleasure, for the ghostly excitement of a gambler. Well, it was his own fault. It was too late to bite his elbows now. Marion allowed herself to be drawn into the circle of rejoicing relatives, where Cassie's grandmother and Cynthia's grandmother hugged each other, saying, "My baby sister," where Kevin was jumping up and down with his eyes shining with excitement, and to where Christopher opened his arms for a big, really happy family. The nurse disagreed with the doctor and was fired, and when an expensive Jeep pulled up outside her house. William couldn't sleep. He lay on the hard hospital bed and stared at the ceiling. Outside the window, behind the high fence, cars drove by from time to time. The time was late, so there were very few of them. And then the light of the headlights ran along the opposite wall. At least some entertainment for a man who couldn't sleep. William knew he was sick. Seriously, incurably ill. That's what his tests and his MRI scan said. The attending physician, Mr. Sam Smith, did not hide the truth from his difficult patient, an inoperable brain tumor, quite large. There's nothing to be done, because the tumor is lined with blood vessels. Intervention is simply impossible. We can only live to see it go. And the easiest way to do that is in the presence of doctors. Modern drugs can make William's condition a little easier, but you can't count on miracles. It's not the first time William has been hospitalized like this. He had an attack at home that made his eyes dark and his consciousness blacked out. Each time it seemed like it was the end. It's scary. Very scary. And every time William woke up in the ward with a feeling of complete powerlessness, impossible weakness, but happy that he could see the light again, hear other people, that he was still here. I didn't expect, William, that Kathy would be there for me at such a difficult moment. Ava, William's wife, was probably right when she said that they needed children. Otherwise, there would be no one to give them a glass of water in their old age. Old age then seemed something far away and abstract. It was not thought of at all. And then, as it turned out, the moment of infirmity had come. And indeed, she was there, the only daughter. Ava was right, after all. William met Ava when he was still in high school. They studied in different schools and lived in different neighborhoods, as they belonged to different strata of society. Ava grew up in a simple family. Mom was a cook, dad was a driver. A small 2-room flat, life from paycheck to paycheck, once in 5 years a trip to the sea. And William, his father, was the head of a large construction company. It was founded by William's grandfather, a family business that was more than profitable. William and his parents lived in a luxury holiday village. Every morning he was taken to a prestigious private grammar school by a family driver. He also picked the boy up after school. It would seem, where could the representatives of such different worlds cross? But everything turned out banal. William and Ava met in the queue at the box office at the local cinema. The girl accidentally stepped on the guy's foot, yelped, and apologized. He looked into her bottomless, turquoise eyes and disappeared. William then found some topic of conversation. Ava readily responded to the invitation to talk, and from that day on they never parted. William liked everything about his new acquaintance. Appearance, which was important, a slender, tall girl with hair the color of ripe wheat and velvet skin of peach shade, and her eyes, turquoise and a little something even feline. They simply fascinated the guy. And Ava turned out to be a wonderful person, sensitive and understanding. Despite her attractive appearance, she did not try to make herself a capricious princess, like many other girls. In all situations, Ava behaved simply and naturally. William, even though he was only a teenager at the time, was able to see her soul and realized that he would never meet another girl like her again. William valued his relationship with Ava, treasured it. They were so good together. Of course, it was not without its difficulties. After school, William went to study at an economic university. His father chose the faculty for him. He said that in order to run their family mini empire, you need professional knowledge in the field of economics. Yes, William did not resist. He liked it so much he didn't mind. Ava went to the local pedagogical school. She dreamed of becoming a teacher of foreign languages. Young people met. William invited his beloved on a date, then in a restaurant, then in a cafe, then just in the city to walk or sit by the river. Obviously, one day the parents of the guy found out that their son has a serious relationship. It was hard not to notice. Realizing that the choice of their only son fell on a girl from a very poor family, both parents were not happy. They started talking about the fact that one should choose one's own level, that one should not let oneself be used. It was not pleasant to listen to all this. William tried to explain to his parents that Ava was not like that at all, that she was special, the best. Only they didn't want to hear it. They gave him an ultimatum: either leave your poor bride or go on your own and don't count on our help. It was an ugly and difficult period in William's life. He's a student, left home. He rented a room in a hostel not far from Ava's house and got a job as a waiter in a bar. It wasn't easy balancing school and work and saving money. But no one dictated to William who he could socialize with. Freedom was intoxicating, dizzying, and exhilarating. Ava was there to support and encourage him. One sight of her, one smile filled William with such strength that he was nothing. Then things settled down. The parents accepted their son's choice. To be honest, William had no doubt that it would be so. The boy's mother and father met Ava and realized that their son was right. They liked her. How could anyone not like Ava anyway? Time passed. The young people got an education, got married, moved into the flat, which the newlyweds were given by the groom's father. Ava, as she dreamed, once went to work in a school, and William went on the road prepared for him from birth, became his father's right hand in the construction company. Under the guidance and supervision of his father, he learnt the ins and outs of the family business. It was only then that William could truly appreciate the work his grandfather had done to create such a complex machine. As time went on, William felt perfectly happy. But Ava, she was very upset that they were not having a baby. William didn't see it as such a problem. They were both still very young, each developing their careers in such a way that there was no need to be bored. William looked at his friends with children and realized that he and Ava had a much easier life. No need to worry about constant colds, no need to stay up at night, carefully planning every trip. And her and Ava, wanted to the sea and flew. Tired of the long winter, bought a plane ticket to warm lands. They decided to walk along the picturesque European streets, also no problem. But William felt sorry for his wife, who it turned out only thought about children. That's why he agreed to be examined together with her. It turned out that Ava suffers from a serious disease. It does not affect her life, but the possibility of becoming a mother practically excludes. Ava sobbed on her husband's shoulder. He was consoling her, saying something. His heart was breaking with pity for his beloved. He tried to convey to her that people can be happy without children. The main thing is that they have each other. The rest is not so important. But Ava, it was like she was fixated on the baby. Maybe it was the proverbial maternal instinct. "You're a man, you don't understand." Ava used to say that a lot. She was probably right, and William really couldn't understand her feelings. It was time for doctors, endless medical procedures, tests, some kind of surgery, rehabilitation. It all dragged on for a long, long time, more than 10 years. The absence of a child, even more like a desperate desire to get the inaccessible, sent life, deprived her of carefree joy. Ava looked in the street at young mothers with prams, saw the babies with a longing look. Even the psychologist William hired for his wife didn't help. They couldn't make her feel any better. "I've dreamed all my life of having a child, a daughter. I imagined how I would dress her up in beautiful dresses, teach her everything, braid her hair. Without children, existence seems meaningless to me." "How meaningless?" argued William. "You're the one who takes care of the children, teaching them English. You talk to them so much, you help them so much. Isn't that the right meaning of life? You have the fate of dozens of children in your hands. You can influence their lives, make them happier, help them." "That's all well and good," of course. Ava shook her head. "But these are other people's children. What about you and me? We don't have a family member. Someone who will give us a glass of water in our old age. What are you doing with that glass of water? Maybe we won't be thirsty at all. If we do, we'll hire someone. We don't have money problems and never will." "It's all wrong." Ava sighed again, and then once again said that it was difficult for him, a man, to understand her worries, or she'd shut up altogether. The worst was when tears appeared in her beautiful turquoise eyes. William couldn't bear it anymore. It's hard to see someone you love suffer, and you, despite all your connections, are unable to help him. William had somehow got used to it. Medical procedures, IVF attempts, one after another. Studying articles on the subject of reproductive science, all this became part of their family's life. Hopes, disappointments, expectations, and pain. And then, when both of them were already a little over 40, Ava suddenly offered her husband to take a child from an orphanage. "We can hardly do it ourselves now. And we're old enough. Where can we take a baby now? We can take in a child of 6 or 7 years old." William thought about it. Somehow he had never imagined himself as a foster father before. Another man's child, another man's genes. It was not an easy decision, but the man had taken the risky step for his wife's sake. For Ava's sake, of course. He hoped that the child would give his beloved back the joy of life, make her happy. Ava herself was searching for a suitable baby for adoption. She had a number of requirements. Firstly, Ava wanted a girl, as she had dreamed of a daughter since childhood. Secondly, it had to be a healthy child and, if possible, cute, ideally similar to them. To William himself, it all seemed something not too right. It was as if his wife was not choosing a child but a product in a shop. But he did not argue, did not interfere with Ava's happiness. Finally, the woman found several girls who matched her description. One lived in an orphanage on the other side of the country. and 2 lived closest, only in a neighboring region. That's where William and Ava went on a sunny Sunday morning in the family SUV. Ava was worried. She tugged at the hem of her long skirt, or the hem of her blouse, and talked. It happened to her in moments of anxiety. William tried to remain outwardly calm, but he too was uneasy. Now they would see their daughter, goosebumps on his back. The director of the orphanage greeted the visitors with a smile, which William thought was played up. She spoke at length about the problems of her institution. The man, of course, understood what it was all about. The orphanage needed sponsorship. He assured the woman that he would help repair the roof. And then she led them into the playroom so the prospective adopters could look at the children. William and Ava stood in the doorway and watched the little ones. About 10 boys and girls, 5, 6 years old. A sharp pity suddenly moved in the man's heart. Somehow he had never thought about orphans before. They are there before his eyes, now small, touching, defenseless, abandoned. No one cuddles them at bedtime, calls them his favorite baby. No one protects them. What have these babies gone through? What other trials had fate prepared for them? Ava looked at the children with a smile. It was evident that she was not thinking such gloomy thoughts. She seemed almost happy that her dream was about to come true. Ava was going to be the mother of a beautiful baby girl. William took a closer look at the babies. Ava had her eye on 2 girls. One of them must be their child. Of course, William had seen their pictures many times, and so now he recognized them unmistakably. The first one was a swarthy black, bright, black-eyed, very beautiful. Already at such age one could notice a marvelous physique and correctness of facial features, chiseled cheekbones, neat nose, eyebrows apart. The girl's movements were quick, confident, and the eyes shone with power. Immediately felt the character. A girl like that would be a good fit. William noticed that the other children feared and respected the dark-haired girl. She was probably a kind of leader. She'd probably take a punch in the forehead without thinking. The second applicant for the role of daughter, on the contrary, looked quiet, even battered. She sat quietly in a corner with a doll and whispered something in her ear. Pale to blue, thin, almost transparent, kind, sad, light blue eyes, a hunted look. William wished he could take this child by the hand and lead her away from here to a quieter, more peaceful place. She was clearly uncomfortable here, among her more combative peers. William glanced at his wife, who was watching the swarthy girl with a proud smile. Is she always this combative? Ava asked the teacher. Yes, she said. Katie is a girl with a temper. She won't let anyone hurt her, or anyone close to her. Fire, girl. Oh, what a beauty. Ava's delight. How come she hasn't been taken away yet, so cute? They took her away alone, sighed the teacher. But they didn't manage it. They played with her like a toy and gave her back. To love someone else's child is not as easy as it seems. It was a waste of a child's soul. Katie was so worried afterwards, so homesick. They're not human beings. Ava frowned. She was still watching Katie with her eyes, not paying any attention to the quiet little blonde girl in the corner. And the other little girl. I think we should take her away, William said. She's not going to be happy here. She'll blossom with us. I don't like the way she's acting, Ava whispered. Maybe she has some kind of illness. You see, she sits there, doesn't talk to anyone. She's a strange girl. Why do we need all this trouble? William did not argue. After all, the matter was entirely in the hands of his wife. She was the reason for the adoption. Then the conversation took place in the principal's office. Have you decided on Katie? A woman in a strict suit asked, opening the girl's file in front of her. Excellent choice. The child is healthy and active, beautiful. But as you understand, all children of the system have some behavioral problems. For the time of adaptation, of course, you should be ready for it. It just won't happen. We know. Ava nodded. Before we looked for a child, we went through the foster parent school. Everything was explained to us there. That's wonderful. The headmistress glowed. You can see that you're serious. You know how it happens. People often take a child, they think it is their toy now. They have some plans, some dreams and expectations about the child. And it suddenly turns out to be not ideal. And then they go back. It's happened to Katie before, by the way. So you should think twice before you take her back. It's a big blow to a child's psyche. I don't know if she'd take that kind of betrayal again. We're not like that, Ava assured her. You can tell. The headmistress was very friendly. Why did that family bring Katie back? William asked. He needed to find out what had happened and what had displeased them. They thought the girl was capricious, too spoiled. But that's nonsense. How can a child from an orphanage be spoiled? And capriciousness? Well, children need attention. All children in their own family, too. Apparently, that family thought it was just whimsy. That's ridiculous. Terrible. Ava nodded her head in agreement. William could see that she was already imagining herself as the mother of the beautiful black-eyed Katie. The wife had fallen under the spell of the little girl. But William kept his mind clear and therefore asked the next very important question. What do we know about the girl's biological parents? War. It's a very strange and terrible story. The headmistress lowered her voice. I'm glad you asked. I was going to tell you myself because it's important, you know. Katie was found in the woods when she was about 2.5 years old. She was tied to a tree and left. Just left for dead. Not even given a chance to get to the road, you know. It's monstrous. Ava burst out, and William felt a chill run down his spine at that information. Exactly, it's monstrous. The girl had spent almost 24 hours in that condition, bitten by mosquitoes and suffering from dehydration and hunger, of course. Just a little bit more, and that would be it. Luckily for the girl, an old woman from the nearest village climbed into those remote places. She was looking for mushrooms and found Katie. Naturally, the girl was first taken to hospital, then sent to us. They searched for her parents, but there was no sign of her. We don't know where this child came from. Katie still remembers something about those times, and she's very afraid of the woods. They took the children for a walk in the woods once, and she had a tantrum. Poor girl. Ava blotted her forehead and moistening eyes with a paper napkin. We're taking her away right now. We can't do that now, the headmistress smiled. We have to prepare the papers. And you still have to get acquainted with the child. If everything goes smoothly, in a week Katie will be at your house. You'll make her very happy. The meeting with the girl took place on the same day, in the same principal's office. The teacher led Katie by the hand. Crossing the threshold, the girl literally stared at the strangers. On her beautiful face, it was impossible to read emotions. It kept complete calmness. Amazing poise for a 6-year-old. This child is curious, but she's afraid to be excited. William thought it was strange. Usually babies have all their emotions out in the open. Katie. These people, they want to meet you. The headmistress addressed the child affectionately. After these words, Katie smiled. It was a beautiful, radiant smile that brightened the child's face and finally won Ava over. William himself seemed to melt. The little girl behaved like a little lady, answering questions in detail, smiling when necessary and keeping silent when necessary. William even thought that if they had had a child of their own, it was unlikely that they would have been able to bring him up like that. A week later, Katie came home, and the very next day the little girl showed her true colors. She could behave impeccably, she could when she wanted to. But it didn't last long, just long enough to charm potential adopters. No longer. Katie acted like everyone around her was the enemy. She was wary, she kept to herself. She shied away from hugs and touches like a wild animal. The girl ate a lot, greedily, quickly, not neatly, and even made a stockpile of food. Under Katie's pillow or in her desk there were constantly found dried sandwiches or melted chocolates. It was unpleasant to watch. It seemed as if Katie, thinking her new parents were greedy and mean, was trying to hoard every morsel. William certainly didn't feel sorry for the girl's food, it was just her behavior that was confusing. Ava attributed it all to Katie's hard life. In the family of the native girl clearly did not see anything good. Yes, and in the state walls life is not sugar. Poor Katie. It'll pass. William didn't argue, but he knew very well that the food at the orphanage was good. He'd been in the kitchen himself, looking at the menu. After Katie had come into his family, the man had taken the orphanage under his wing, had become its sponsor, its permanent trustee. Even his grandfather laid this habit in him, always let part of the proceeds go to charity. Exorbitant appetite Katie, however, did not affect her figure. No matter how many calorie-laden treats the girl shoved into herself, she remained slim and lean, probably because of her unprecedented activity. Katie couldn't stay in one place with her toys for 5 minutes at the most. Then she got bored and switched to something else. Ava explained such hyperactivity as a nervous disorder. It is understandable fate was not favorable to this child. William enrolled his adopted daughter to the best neurologist in the city. What was the surprise of the new parents when the doctor found no abnormalities in the girl? Katie had the ability to behave in public like a little angel. In the neurologist's office, she kept calm, not even kicking her legs. She answered questions thoroughly and smiled sweetly at the doctor, who of course immediately charmed her. The neurologist prescribed some mild sedatives and recommended the girl to take long walks in the fresh air every day. No abnormalities were detected by the specialist. William, he then for the first time felt a kind of dislike for the girl. The transformation of little Katie displeased him very much. At home, Katie was back to her old hyperactive self. Again, she blew her small, slightly pulled-out nose everywhere. Again, from the shelves flew things on the floor, as if accidentally broken dishes and broken furniture and appliances. The little brat was a real natural disaster, a kind of hurricane. And William now knew for sure that Katie could control herself. She just didn't want to bother. William still spent most of his time away from home. Business required his constant presence. He would return in the late afternoon. Kathy was usually asleep by then. Ava met the man, tired, exhausted from a noisy, active child, but happy all the same. All they talked about now was Katie, and Ava admired the little bully's behavior. She thought Katie was free, determined, brave, proud, and very inquisitive. The girl's pranks, they seemed to the woman as cute, childish pranks. William had almost no experience with children, but even he realized that normal 6-year-olds didn't behave like that. The man saw that Katie was deliberately angering the people around her, making them emotional. How many times he had noticed she would turn over the documents on his desk or spill his coffee and look at her foster father, waiting for a reaction. Noticing on the victim's face confusion, sadness, or offense, the girl smiled happily. However, this smile was on her face only for a moment. Then the happy expression was replaced by a grimace of regret. But William always managed to notice Katie's first emotion. It was joy and delight at having managed to make someone bad. Several times Katie had nearly given her mother a heart attack. One time she went missing while walking in the park. Ava ran through the alleys, calling for her daughter. She joined the search for the mothers with older children who were walking there at the time. The poor woman was about to go to the police. But then Katie came out of the little house on the playground, as if nothing had happened, and said she thought they were playing hide and seek, so she didn't come out. William did not see his adopted daughter at that moment. He only learned about the incident in the evening when he returned from work. But the man had no doubts. Katie must have been smiling happily, looking at the frightened, crying mother. You bet. Such a gig because of her. Another time, Katie left the window open in her room, then knocked down the chair next to it so that the rumble would be heard by her parents, and hid behind the door. Of course, a terrified Ava immediately flew into the nursery and saw the open sashes of the window, the overturned chair. And this was the attic, the height of the 3rd floor. William saw his spouse turn pale in an instant. He was frightened himself. Had something terrible happened? But fortunately, at that moment, the man heard a restrained giggle from behind the door. He pulled the little bully out of there by the ear. Seeing her daughter safe and sound, Ava smiled weakly and slid down the wall. She was dizzy and sore for a long time afterwards, and Katie, she didn't care. She said the draught had blown the window open. But the fact was that William had locked it well before the incident and remembered it well. Katie lied again. She often told untruths in general. And these were not cases where she had to justify herself or escape responsibility. It seemed that Kathy just liked to lie, or fantasize, as Ava put it. Katie made up fantastic stories about her past. She had been beaten and starved at the orphanage, and once a teacher had beaten her with a hot rod. Ava was heartbroken by such revelations. William at first was shocked too, but Katie, she sometimes overreacted. Still, she was only 6 years old and could not yet make up completely believable stories. It was the details that gave her away. Like this red, hot rod. Where did the teacher make the pond hot? William asked. On the fireplace. Katie answered without blinking an eye. There was no fireplace in the orphanage. William was well aware of that. Worst of all, his wife believed the little liar. She considered the open nonsense about the hardships of life in the orphanage and another family, the one that had abandoned her, to be just a work of the child's imagination, a kind of self-defense of the psyche. It was just hard and bad for the girl there, so she had such fantasies in her head. She actually thinks it's true. Katie, it was as if she saw, understood William didn't trust her, unlike her softer, more compliant mother. That's why she was more careful and cunning with her adoptive father, and at every opportunity she set up situations to make him guilty in the eyes of his wife. For example, she deliberately drove William to shouting, and it was important to Katie that Ava heard it. Then the girl immediately extinguished the defiant light in her eyes. Her face took a frightened and pitiful expression. Ava looked at her husband reproachfully and hugged the girl. She adored her daughter and did not see any flaws in her. She dressed her like a doll, piled her with toys, took her to cafes, theaters, circuses, and other entertainments, and felt truly happy around her. William tried to convey to his wife that the girl should be more strict, and even suggested that she should be enrolled in a psychologist. Maybe Katie really needs help. It'll all pass, Ava smiled. And the gobbling, and the fantasy, and the hyperactivity. It's just an adjustment. The girl has a new life. She needs love, care. She'll thaw out. Be gentle with her, please. Vera looked at Katie with adoration, admiring the girl for a long time. Yes, Katie was indeed strikingly beautiful. But how? How did Ava not notice the fact that she was just a little monster? Well, or at least a child in need of psychological help. Katie was cruel to those who were smaller and weaker than her. In William and Ava's home, only pets fell into that category. Kathy's first victim was Fluffy the cat, an elderly and trusting animal who had been used to love and care over her long life. William noticed that the cat began to behave differently than before, hiding, shying away from the hand that reaches out to pet her. It didn't come up to him like it used to cuddle and purr. And then he accidentally saw a terrible picture. Katie, angrily flashing her eyes, kicked old Fluffy. The animal meowed weakly and dashed away, but the girl wouldn't let her leave the corner. What are you doing? William pulled a furious Katie away from the cat. It was strange and frightening. So much cruelty in one very young girl. But where did it come from? She was confused at first, but then, as was her custom, slammed her black eyes shut and made a face like she was going to cry. Ava came running into the room at once. What's going on in here? Katie, do you want to tell Mummy how you tortured the cat? I didn't, exclaimed the girl, rubbing the shoulder William had just held her on. We were just playing, really. Well, and then everything went on, according to Katie's usual scenario: tears, Ava comforting her, and a reproachful and accusing look at her husband from behind her shoulder. William had discussed the cat incident with Ava at length, but she had assured her husband that he had imagined it. Or Katie had just been playing with the cat and had miscalculated her strength that happens to children. When, a little later, an even worse incident occurred. Ava also said that it had been an accident, and that the canary, who had been found in the cage in the morning with a broken neck, had simply hit the bars or fallen off the perch in its sleep. Only William realized who was to blame for the death of the harmless yellow bird. He had no proof, of course, but Katie had never liked the canary. The girl was frankly annoyed by its trills in the morning, and the way she looked at it sometimes gave her the creeps. William, after the incident with the bird, even went to those people that once took Katie from the orphanage and then returned her. They were a large and friendly family. They lived in a spacious private home. Katie's former foster mother at first did not want to talk to William on this subject, but he admitted to her that he did not understand how to behave with a foster child. That's when the woman decided to be frank. It turned out that Katie, from the very first days in the new house, turned the life of other small children of this family into hell. She was very cruel to the little ones, and those who were older almost turned into her slaves. She had a knack for manipulating those around her. The last straw was the girl's attempt to feed a 6-month-old baby with bitter pills. Katie later explained to the foster parents that she wanted to see what kind of grimace he'd make. To keep the other children safe, we brought her back. The woman shook her head. I still feel guilty. I couldn't handle the girl. I did such a terrible thing. But it was for the sake of the other children. I don't know what would have crossed her mind next time. If I hadn't managed to intercept her hand when she was about to give the child those drugs, what would have happened to her? This family, they had experience with children, both birth and foster. They had fostered children from orphanages and, along with their own, dreamed of giving shelter and family to the little people that fate had treated so unfairly. But after Katie, there were no more foster children in their family. I just hadn't seen kids like that before. She scared us, really scared us. William listened to Katie's former foster mother's confession and shook his head in agreement. Yes, he quite recognized his daughter. So Katie had always been like this. Even as a little girl, he decided not to tell his wife about his visit to Katie's former family. She wouldn't have approved. But the girl, William would now look at her with particular attention. Ava was enchanted and blinded by her love for the beautiful little Kathy. Her long-held dream had come true. Ava did not want to hear anything bad about her favorite girl. Katie was well aware of how precious she was to her mother and manipulated her skillfully. Such abilities of such a young child frightened William. He involuntarily thought about what would happen next. Children grow up so fast, after all. What happened next was that Katie didn't want to learn. She made up 100 reasons not to go to school. She was sick. Her teacher was cruel. She told such stories about her first teacher that Ava almost ran to the phone to call the police. Katie had caught herself in time and got out of it. She knew the police would definitely expose her. Then money started going missing from the house. First small change from her pockets, then larger sums. William knew exactly who was doing it. He made a habit of keeping cash in special hiding places that the girl didn't know about. And that's where the money stayed safe. In his own home, William no longer felt calm and relaxed. Next came more. Katie received complaints from the school hurts the children, does not learn lessons, does not work in the classroom. Then it turned out that Katie was stealing from her classmates. The girl was literally caught by the hand. It was just so confusing. Katie didn't need anything. As soon as she asked for even a hint that she dreamed of something, Ava immediately ran to buy it for her. Apparently, Kathy enjoyed the process. Ava continued to claim that the girl was being talked down to. She is clever, beautiful, the prettiest girl in school. That's why her classmates are jealous of her, saying all sorts of nasty things about her. Kids are so cruel. Well, and frankly boorish and inadequate behavior of her daughter at lessons, Ava wrote off on her freedom-loving character and self-confidence. It's just that teachers like only comfortable and obedient children. Our Katie is not like that. People like that make leaders. And Katie was a leader. He formed a group around her. Together, these children were pushing those who were weaker than them physically, skipping classes, and who knows what else they were doing. Ava had long conversations with her daughter. William heard it sometimes and realized it was useless. And Katie, she was just an amazing person. William had never seen such a person in his whole life, not a drop of empathy, warm feelings for loved ones, affection. Katie knew nothing of such feelings, she simply didn't have them. Ava thought her daughter loved and respected her. But William saw that Katie was just pretending. As she grew older, the cunning girl understood what behavior was expected of her. She showed it by telling Ava she loved her and hugging her foster mother. William's wife melted from tenderness and was ready for such hugs to forgive her daughter anything. She loves us, she needs us so much, Ava repeatedly said, looking at her husband with pleading eyes. The woman saw how he felt about Katie. Yes, William had said many times that the girl needed to be tougher. But Ava had dreamed of being the mother of a sweet, beautiful princess for so long that she just didn't want to see the obvious. Did William love Katie? It was hard to answer that question unequivocally. Many things about her frightened him, alarmed him. The life of a man with the appearance of a child became more restless. He had to solve many different issues: psychologists, doctors, conversations with outraged teachers, parents of offended children. Now the man kept a lot of things under control, and of course he was worried about the future of the girl. She's growing up. Soon the age of criminal responsibility would be upon her. And if Katie doesn't change her behavior, the problems she constantly provokes will be much harder to solve. And at the same time, of course, William has grown attached to the girl. He's invested so much in her. He took her from the orphanage as a baby. Now she's almost a teenager, quite successful, I must say. Yes, she has a lot of behavioral problems, but the girl began to get good grades, learned to keep herself quite tolerable in society. By the way, she's been good at it since she was a little girl. Only now that she was older, Katie could be a lady for a lot longer. If she wanted to be, of course. Did William regret that they had taken Katie out of the orphanage then? Yes and no. Katie was a lot of trouble. William thought there would soon be more, but Ava, she was truly happy, no matter what. Her wife argued that motherhood was not only joy and happiness, but also labor, hard work, and she willingly bore the burden. Thanks to Katie, Ava had realized herself as a mother, and for that reason alone, William already felt that what they had done years ago was absolutely right. Problems, all children have them. It's part and parcel of parenthood. Katie was growing up. From a pretty teenager, she gradually turned into a very pretty young girl. William even developed a paternal pride about it. He involuntarily compared his adopted daughter with the daughters of his acquaintances and realized Katie outshines all these girls. Tall, slender, bright. A little exoticism of appearance gave a swarthy shade of skin and coal-black eye color. This same favorable appearance turned out to be another problem. Kathy began to pay attention to guys, and not only peers, but also young people older. Given Katie's wayward nature, William sensed trouble. And so it began. Katie had boyfriends. With them, she skipped school and extra classes, paid by her parents to increase her daughter's chances for a good university. But the girl did not like cramming. She didn't think about the future. She realized that her father and mother were already wealthy. Would provide for her. She didn't need to fight for a place under the sun, so she could enjoy her youth and carefree life to the fullest. Katie was enjoying herself. How many times William had to break off in the middle of the night and go to a club because Ava was so excited. Of course, she would an underage daughter, unknown where and unknown with whom. William had to pull Katie out of dubious company, or even the arms of grown-up boys. They had to be reminded of her age. As a rule, the young men would immediately disappear, and Katie would get angry and insult her foster father with the last words for depriving her of fun. William could see that Katie was a fish out of water in her own environment. She enjoys drinking, fleeting romances, likes to dance. She gets along easily with people whose interests are limited to partying and drinking. She feels good, comfortable with them. She is not in the mood to learn, to work, to achieve something. Her life is, that's all it is. Everything she and her wife are trying so hard to get Katie out of. And the girl, she hates them for it. And there's no changing that it's who she is. William wondered more than once about Katie's real blood parents. Who were they? What genes did they pass on to their daughter? And was nurture really powerless against the call of the blood? Kira was beautiful, very beautiful. She was most likely born of a mixed bloodline. There was something exotic about her appearance, as if one of her relatives had been a foreigner. And as for Kira's behavior and lifestyle, her parents must have liked to lay behind the collar. Who else but a man degraded by alcoholic beverages would treat his own daughter like that, leaving her in the woods? As time went on, Katie became an adult. Now she could disappear somewhere for days and even weeks. She came back tired and thin, but as happy as a cat that had taken a walk. After school, she didn't go anywhere to study, and she didn't work either. Companies, friends, girlfriends, nightclubs, that's all that made up her life. She also traveled, but not to museums in Europe, but to bars and discos in other countries. She always had money, thanks to Ava. William saw that nothing good would come out of his adopted daughter, and he foresaw a very sad ending to the story. Katie was a drinker, and probably something more serious. She was easy to get along with strangers, not caring who they were or what they did, just as long as it was fun. That kind of lifestyle couldn't be good. William had gotten her out of serious trouble several times before. If it wasn't for him and his connections, Katie would have been in juvie a long time ago, maybe where she belonged. Maybe it would have shaken her up a little, made her think about her own behavior. But Ava, there was Ava, for whom Katie was the light in the window, the only meaning of life. Ava blamed herself for Katie growing up like this. She didn't sleep at night when her daughter was out with her friends, constantly dialing Katie's number. Usually she'd hang up, and if she answered, it was only to ask her to wire money again. Kathy was literally a rope in her mother's arm. She'd been manipulating Ava since she was a little girl. It didn't work on her father. Katie could see that William understood and saw right through her, so she was more careful with him. And strangely enough, despite her father's strictness, Katie respected him more than her mother. She was afraid, perhaps, above all, of being cut off from the trough, as William realized it was his only leverage over his estranged daughter. And then Katie disappeared, finding herself some rich suitor. As Victor and Ava realized, it was a man much older than their daughter. Katie didn't need her parents' money anymore. She could take it from someone she had complete power over. And the girl disappeared off the radar, flying off with this man somewhere. The young beauty preferred not to answer her parents' calls. Why? She had money now. William and Ava at that time followed their daughter's movements by rare photos in her social networks. Expensive resorts, famous clubs of the world. Katie looked happy and beautiful next to her status beau. By the way, there were not too pleasant rumors about him, as if he was the son of a big businessman. After his father died, he inherited his fortune. The man was always involved in some scandalous story. He was dragging Katie into it too, and she didn't seem to mind. Ava suffered. She dreamed of having a daughter. Imagined what kind of friends they'd be when she grew up. She thought Katie would have a profession, be a person. And here it is, a girl that Ava had worked so hard for, that she'd put her whole soul into. She's just disappeared, literally run away from her parents and doesn't want to know them. So much for a glass of water in your old age. William grinned bitterly one day. It's my fault. There's something I didn't give that girl. I suppose it's not for nothing that nature didn't give me a child of my own. I'm not a very good parent. What's that got to do with you? It's just nature, genes. Genes are a powerful thing. No matter how much you feed the wolf, Don't talk about her like that, Ava protested. It's all about me. Your Katie will come back, don't worry. William waved his hand. He was sure of what he was saying. When she gets bored with her rich boyfriend, she'll find a new beauty, and he'll send ours away. She'll come crawling home. You'll see. And she did. Katie came back, gaunt, thin, angry. Ava welcomed her with open arms and never reproached her. William could see that Katie was uncomfortable with her foster mother clucking at her, but she tolerated it. Where could she go? True, the happiness didn't last long. Soon Katie disappeared again, this time taking with her her foster mother's jewelry, including family items, as well as a substantial sum of money from the safe. How did she know the code? William had kept it carefully hidden from her eyes. For Ava, it was a blow from which she never recovered. The woman, she believed Katie had changed, realized a lot about life. The adopted daughter masterfully played the role of the repentant girl. Even William almost thought that all was not lost. And then it happened. Ava was not herself for days. William comforted her as best he could. He was worried about his wife. He didn't like her pallor and lethargy. And then the heart attack. Ava had never had a heart attack before. It was very sudden. Ava wasn't saved. William, he couldn't believe this was all happening in reality. Ava, she was his closest person, someone worth living for. And now what? Katie didn't even show up to say goodbye. And that was a good thing, because William blamed his adopted daughter for what happened to Ava. Katie had tormented her mother's heart for so many years, played with her feelings, was the cause of her constant worry and anxiety. That was why the woman's heart couldn't take it. William hated Kathy at the time, and if she had turned up at the funeral, he probably would have told her to her face. It would have been a huge scandal. God forbid it didn't involve violence. So it's a good thing Katie wasn't there, though she certainly couldn't have been unaware of the incident. After saying goodbye to his wife, William first of all hired lawyers to make sure that Kathy could not even claim the inheritance. It will be fine. They had already invested so much in her. All roads and paths were open to Kathy. She herself chose a dubious way of life, so let her now and spill what she brewed. She had brought a lot of grief to their family, so she wouldn't get the money that William's grandfather, his father, and then himself had worked so hard to earn. She didn't deserve it. And in general, William now wants to know nothing about Kathy. The man fulfilled his obligations. He raised the girl he once took from an orphanage. Now let her be on her own. Katie didn't turn up for a long time. She had somehow learnt that she had been disinherited, and had even written an angry letter to her adoptive father about it. William only smiled as he read the message. Kathy is angry. She's furious. That's a good thing. The years went by. It was hard for William to get used to the lonely life, to life without Ava, who had always been his best friend, who understood his husband half-heartedly. Work saved him. The man tried not to think about Kathy. Sometimes, of course, he thought about her. How was she? Maybe she drank herself to death long ago, followed in the footsteps of her biological parents. Maybe Kathy was dead with her risky lifestyle. It's not unlikely. And then 10 years after Ava's death, when William himself was already a very respectable, honorable age, she showed up. William eyed the beautiful woman on the doorstep with minimal makeup, inexpensive but stylish and tidy clothes. Yes, the adopted daughter had surprised him again. Not at all what he had imagined her to be. Kathy repented, apologized, almost on her knees, assured that all these years she felt guilty for what had happened to Ava. I didn't go to the funeral because I was ashamed. Ashamed to look you in the eye, and the guilt was too much. I wasn't myself then. William even felt sorry for his adopted daughter. It's hard to live with guilt for years. Katie told him a little about herself. It turns out she's trained as a seamstress, lives in a neighboring town, works in an attire, married, with children. Unfortunately, nothing works out. But she and her husband do not give up hope. They live modestly but decently. They bought a flat with a mortgage. An ordinary family, like 1 million across the country. William thought that Katie had decided to get on with her adoptive father because of the inheritance, but the young woman never said a word about it. All she said was that she wanted companionship and warmth, and she constantly berated herself for the foolishness of her youth. I caused you so much trouble. You were always saving me, pulling me out of somewhere, forgiving me, and I didn't appreciate it at all then. It's different now. Kathy indeed has become different, wise, calm, short. Life experience has gone in her favor. Katie had realized a lot of things. William loved to socialize with this new Kathy. Now they were sort of on equal footing, understanding each other more. Father and daughter reminisced about the past, told each other about their current lives, watched films together and laughed about things. William felt that he now had a dear and close person next to him. The man wanted to meet Kira's husband, but he was working at a construction site, taking part-time jobs, constantly busy. Kira assured that her husband was a wonderful man, and one day they would definitely get acquainted. You're sure to like him. Katie smiled. You two are alike in some ways. Even workaholics, both of you. William felt warm towards Kathy for the first time in years. He couldn't believe how things had turned out. It was about then that his health began to fail. There appeared dizziness, headaches. Soon doctors gave William a terrible diagnosis of brain tumor, untreatable. And during this difficult time, Katie was by his side. She accompanied her father to the hospital and even found the best doctor for him. It was the head doctor of the local regional hospital. Kathy was worried about her father, although she tried to hide her feelings, tried to appear outwardly calm and reasonable. But William's diagnosis was a blow to her as well. Sometimes her despair would break through. I had just found someone close to me. We were so close, and then this happened. When William was in hospital, Kathy visited him often, even though she lived in another city. Ava was right after all. It's really important for an elderly person to have the support and involvement of someone close to home. The proverbial glass of water. Kathy came with hotels and news. She was like a ray of light and warmth for William. He smiled as he looked at his adopted daughter and really wished Ava had lived to see this moment. Hadn't seen that Katie had made a wonderful person. William lay on the hospital bed and thought about his life. He remembered Ava and was glad that Katie was not lost after all. She had made it through, had become a good person, had married. Of course, at the first opportunity, William would sign over the inheritance to her. Now it's not a terrible or hurtful thing to leave Katie such a fortune. We'll have to get some lawyers to the hospital soon. You never know. His diagnosis is serious. His labs are getting worse, and he's not feeling well. We need to get everything ready so that Katie won't be left with nothing if anything happens. In the morning, William was woken up by a young nurse, Anne. She's a good one, caring, attentive, blonde hair, kind blue eyes. And what a light hand she gives injections in such a way that you don't even notice the discomfort. Smiling, friendly. William liked it when it was Anne who took over his shift, but today she woke him up too early, and she looked anxious and worried. Was something wrong? William asked. It's only 6. We need to talk. The young woman explained. William was surprised. He hadn't expected this. Well, let's talk. The man nodded, sitting down on the bed. The movement made him abruptly dizzy. Getting out of bed was out of the question. William's condition was deteriorating at a very rapid pace. You know, I've been a nurse here a long time. I have experience. Your diagnosis, it's very questionable. You're being lied to. I don't know why, but... At that moment, an angry head doctor came into the room. What a time to be up so early. That was surprising, too. Don't you get it? You're fired. He shouted right in Anne's face. I told you to get out of here. You stick your nose in everything, and you've never heard of medical ethics. You're being lied to. Anne continued hurriedly. Don't believe them. You're being lied to. Your daughter has something to do with this. Don't eat or drink what she brings you. Get out. The head doctor grabbed Anne by the shoulder and dragged her out of the room. Then he slammed the door shut and turned to the surprised William. I apologize for this incident. Anne is a nurse and thinks she's a doctor. Unrealized ambition probably got it into her head that you were misdiagnosed. She's always dreaming of conspiracies. I'm sick of it. So much so that I fired her. Now she's bothering you. I'm sorry again for what happened. Where did she get that idea? Well, who knows her? Probably trying to prove her worth. That's the kind of person she is. Well, she's overreacting. Don't worry, she won't bother you again. The doctor went out, carefully closing the door behind him, and William thought hard. Anne had grown up in an orphanage. It had been hard for her there as a quiet and modest girl. Her more active, combative peers abused her. They took away Anne's food, hung their faults on her, for which the girl got even from the carers. Anne especially remembered Katie, a dark-haired, beautiful girl who literally gave her no life. Sometimes Anne thought that one day Kathy would kill her. All her anger, all her despair, all her dissatisfaction with life, Kathy took it out on Anne. And then she, Kathy, was taken into the family. Anne remembered that day. People came to the orphanage. They were watching the children in the playroom. The man, he looked at her, at Anne, so much so that the girl believed they would choose her. But they took Katie, of course. Who else? Katie was the prettiest kid in their orphanage, and she acted like an angel in front of her foster parents. Katie could do that. After Katie was taken away, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Not only those who had been getting a kick out of her, but also her friends and even the staff. Anne had always studied hard, tried hard, realized this was her only chance to achieve something. After 9th grade, she went to medical school. She really wanted to help people. She graduated, got a flat from the state as an orphan, and got a job. Anne built her life slowly but surely, brick by brick. First, she repaired the flat, then she bought new furniture. The next step was to get a license and buy a car on credit. Anne lived quietly, calmly, happy with the coziness that she herself created. Communicated with friends, went from time to time on dates. True, nothing serious, it did not end so far, and it's a pity. Anne already dreamed of a family and children. She felt as lonely as a twig in the wind. She had girlfriends, of course, but that wasn't quite the same as a family. Anne worked as a nurse in a hospital not far from home. The job was easy for her. She liked helping people, and the patients felt it and responded to the caring nurse with gratitude. And recently Anne saw her, Kathy, in the hospital. Anne immediately recognized the girl from the orphanage. But Kathy, she didn't even notice Anne. She was rarely interested in people at all. Of course, she had forgotten the child she had treated so unfairly years ago. Kathy looked simple, even modest. Discreet clothes, no makeup, reserved manners. But Anne could see she hadn't changed. They never do. Her gaze was greedy, vicious, sharp, and cold. The same soulless predator. Kathy was visiting an elderly man on the pay ward. The man was being treated by the chief medical officer himself, Mr. Sam Smith. He must have been a very important patient. Anne looked at the man and suddenly remembered. He was the same man who had looked at her so warmly in the playroom of the orphanage. When Anne's fate had been decided, he had wanted to take her away. The girl knew it, but his wife had made the choice. Women are always in charge in such matters. Anne realized that even when she was a little girl, and now he, Katie's adoptive father, is in the hospital. He's been diagnosed with a serious condition that leaves no chance of saving him. It's a shame. Anne involuntarily became more attentive to William. That was the name of the patient, Katie's foster father. Anne noticed some inconsistencies in the tests and MRI results, and then she realized that some of the documents were not real. Anne quickly realized Katie was up to something. You can expect anything from her. It was obvious that William was getting worse after her visits, after he drank or ate something Katie had brought him. Anne has clearly traced this connection. Kathy is probably putting something in those gifts. Is she poisoning the man who gave her a secure childhood in the family, provided a future? For what? The answer lay on the surface in inheritance. I'm sure Katie doesn't want to wait. She needs to get her hands on her father's money as soon as possible. So she thought of something like this. Dasha takes her observations to the head doctor, Mr. Smith. As the boss, he's supposed to sort it all out. But hearing Anne, the man became furious. He told her off for exceeding her authority, sticking her nose in other people's business, and thinking herself a full-fledged doctor. In general, for the first time in her life, the boss shouted at Anne, and even so fiercely. Why? She's right. And the head doctor should at least check her words. And it's so easy. She realized later that Mr. Smith was also involved. But it was too late. He'd already sacked her without pay. He told her to pack her things and stay away from his hospital. Unless Anne wanted a wolf ticket that would get her nowhere. Anne realized that Kathy and Mr. Smith were in cahoots. They had a terrible plan to send William to the afterlife early, probably for money. Anne knew she had to warn him. William wouldn't know anything, would he? That's why the woman sneaked into the hospital, despite Mr. Smith's warnings. Her dismissal had not yet been announced, so the appearance of a familiar nurse in the hospital corridors was no surprise to anyone. Anne didn't have time for that. She tried to explain to William that his life was in danger, but only said a few sentences. And then Mr. Smith flew into the ward, dragged her out and down the stairs. The head doctor was furious. How did he know she'd turned up? He had informants in the hospital, someone who had been watching William's room. Anne didn't have time. She won't get another chance. The man was in grave danger and there was nothing Anne could do. She tried going to the police, but they wouldn't even take a statement. They told her to sort things out with her ex-friend from the orphanage without their involvement. They had enough on their plate. They thought Kathy had done something to Anne and that she was trying to get even. Anyway, they didn't believe it. A week and a half went by and Anne was in a state of turmoil. She was desperately searching for a way to save the man from imminent disaster. William's diagnosis was a hoax. There was no tumor growing in his head. Patients like that look very different. Anne had seen them over the years in hospitals. But what could she do? They wouldn't let her near the hospital now. She tried again, but the guard rudely escorted her out of the building and threatened her. Then Mr. Smith called, threatening her too. Absolutely, it was a desperate situation. Anne was returning from shopping when she noticed a large black SUV in her driveway. Its door opened, and a man slid down from the passenger seat. When Anne saw who it was, she couldn't believe her eyes. William, in a black t-shirt and jeans, gaunt, pale, but in his kind gray eyes there was already strength and energy. Unbelievable. Not so long ago he couldn't even get out of bed, and now he was walking around the city. Could someone have saved him? Anne couldn't have done it. Who did? Hello, Anne. William smiled, stunned at the woman. If it hadn't been for you, I'd have been gone in a couple of months, maybe even sooner. And now look at me, I'm walking on my own feet, going to the sea. But I didn't have time to do anything. I didn't have time to tell you. You had time to do the most important thing. You've said enough. You started talking. And then I realized. William invited Anne into the saloon car. It would be more comfortable to talk there. Dasha settled down on the soft leather seat. The cabin was pleasantly cool and music was playing softly. William settled down next to her and began the story. The words of Anne, who had managed to break into his room that morning, had planted a seed of doubt in his heart. He thought about it and realized that it was indeed his daughter's visits that made him feel worse. If Katie was away for a few days, his condition would improve, or at least stabilize. But after she left, the pain and dizziness would return. Not just return, but intensified. William remembered Anne's words about not touching his daughter's guests. There was something about that. Kathy came that afternoon, brought juice and fruit, asked about her father's health, told him something about herself, the usual. When she left, William called his driver, one of the people he trusted implicitly, handed him the juice, and asked him to send the drink for analysis, an urgent analysis. The result was ready the very next day. The juice contained a substance which was, in fact, a poison to man. In small doses, the substance killed slowly. Gradually, the person gradually faded away. And then William immediately turned to a private detective. This specialist, with such irrefutable evidence on hand, had no difficulty in unraveling the case with the support of the police. The truth seemed horrible, but it at least fit into William's picture of the world. Indeed, why would Kathy suddenly change? People are always the same. Some people just learn to hide it, like Katie. Anyway, she planned to get her inheritance back and send her adoptive father to the afterlife so that she could get his money and live happily ever after. Anne had got it right. Kathy chose a very sophisticated way, but completely safe for her. To carry out her cunning plan, she even had to charm Mr. Smith, a married, solid man, could not resist the charms of Kathy. She told him about her difficult childhood and the abuse of her adoptive father, and asked him to help her get her inheritance back, and at the same time to take revenge on a bad man. Mr. Smith, fascinated by the experienced manipulator, agreed. Kathy began to put a substance in her father's food that caused symptoms of severe illness. It was easy to do, as she had managed to gain her foster father's trust and became a frequent guest at his home. Then William's condition worsened, the hospital. And then William fell under the wing of Mr. Smith, who masterfully created the appearance of a serious illness. If it hadn't been for Anne, if it hadn't been for her powers of observation, even if she hadn't remembered or recognized Kathy. For that was what had made her suspicious of the criminal couple. It would have worked. Now they were both on remand and William was on the mend, as the poison was no longer entering his system on a regular basis. "So you saved my life, Anne." William shook his head. "Can you believe it? I even recognized you after all these years. It seems incredible, but you're the same girl with the doll from the playroom at the orphanage where my wife and I took Katie from. You don't remember, of course." "I do." Anne smiled. It was as if a mountain had fallen from her shoulders. All those days she'd been out of her mind, struggling, trying to find a way out. To know that a person was in mortal danger and to be unable to change anything was terrifying. And now fate had brought us together again. William put a warm palm on Anne's shoulder. "There are no accidents. You saved me, and I will do everything to make your life easy, pleasant, and happy. Believe me, if I promise, then it will be so." Anne smiled silently. She suddenly realized that she would never be lonely again. She had a wall behind which nothing could be feared, a close person.